It was late spring, and my garden was in full bloom. Rows of heirloom tomatoes, peppers, and flowers that I had painstakingly cultivated over the years. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and fresh soil, and everything felt peaceful. That peace, of course, was about to be shattered by HOA Karen. Karen had long been obsessed with control, and this time her obsession manifested in a particularly destructive way. She had begun driving her SUV through my garden repeatedly, crushing plants, flattening flower beds, and leaving tire tracks that scarred the landscape I had nurtured for months. At first, I tried to reason with her, sending polite notes and even attempting to speak face to face, but Karen's arrogance made negotiation impossible. She believed she could assert authority simply because she felt entitled to the property. One morning, I found the garden completely trashed. The plants were bent, soil overturned, and my prized tomatoes were squashed. Instead of succumbing to frustration, I began planning a response. This wasn't about revenge in the emotional sense. It was about teaching her a lesson she would never forget, and doing so in a way that was clever, controlled, and indisputable. I started by repairing the most important sections of the garden, but I also set up subtle traps. Not harmful, just clever deterrents that would make it impossible for her to continue without being caught. Motion sensors, hidden cameras, and a few harmless but surprising alerts were positioned around the perimeter. Every inch of my garden was now under surveillance, and I knew exactly where she would likely strike next. Sure enough, she returned, SUV roaring down the driveway like she owned the land. Her eyes gleamed with the same smug certainty she always carried, the belief that she could intimidate anyone. But this time, the moment she drove onto my property, alarms blared, cameras whirred, and a series of harmless but startling deterrents activated. Tires spun in shallow sand traps, motion sensors triggered lights and recorded her every move, and a few strategically placed sprinklers drenched her SUV just enough to make a scene without causing real damage. Karen panicked. She had expected obedience, fear, or at least passive compliance. But instead, she was confronted with a garden that was actively defending itself, fully monitored, and entirely prepared. Her frustration mounted as I calmly stepped onto the porch, clipboard in hand, showing her evidence of her repeated trespasses. Her expression shifted from anger to disbelief, then fear, as she realized she had been trapped in a situation entirely of my design. Neighbors, drawn by the noise and commotion, began to gather. Karen attempted to explain herself, but the video footage clearly showed her vehicle repeatedly crushing the garden. Every lie she tried to spin was instantly undermined by the evidence. The humiliation was complete. Her once commanding presence had evaporated, leaving her exposed and powerless in front of everyone who had witnessed her rampage, or who would soon hear about it. By the end of the day, the garden was mostly intact, the crushed areas repaired, and Karen had been thoroughly embarrassed. The message was clear. She could no longer assume that intimidation, destruction, or entitlement would go unanswered. My preparation, foresight, and calm execution had turned what could have been a stressful confrontation into a decisive victory. Walking through the garden that evening, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Each flower, each tomato plant, stood as a testament not just to patience and care, but to strategic thinking. Karen had tried to dominate, destroy, and control, but my response had been clever, precise, and undeniable. The neighborhood had witnessed it, and Karen would think twice before ever attempting such reckless behavior again. That day, I realized something important. Sometimes the most effective payback isn't anger. It's preparation, intelligence, and the ability to turn someone else's aggression into their own undoing. Karen had come to crush my garden, but she left humbled, speechless, and finally aware that she couldn't win against foresight and strategy.